Good. That was probably just enough time for Tim to get my coffee. Yeah. And so the next item on the agenda is the Northern Arterial, which is in Northern Corridor, which is the second, well, yeah, it's a supplementary. Yep. And so, Richard, I'm going to invite you to provide some an overarching sort of commentary on, or you can invite one of your team to provide a sort of kind of overarching commentary on what this paper has been designed to achieve, and why we are where we are now, and the decision that we're being asked to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, if I could just do a couple of introductions. To my right is Dave Aldridge, who is a safety engineer from Becker, so an independent safety engineer. To my left, Ross Herrick from Council. We're both assisting on this project. So perhaps just a bit of an overview of where this project sits. Might be useful to provide a little bit of context. So the Christchurch Northern Corridor is one of the Christchurch RONs. It's really two separate but interdependent projects. The NZTA portion of the project goes from Waimak Bridge to just south of QE2 Drive. The Christchurch City Council portion of the project is from just south of QE2 Drive, so exactly where we meet with the NZTA, to just south of the Cranford-Innes intersection. So, and those projects are now known as the Christchurch Northern Corridor, and it's been procured as one delivery project on what's called a competitive alliance. And that's where we work with the contractors, the designers, and the New Zealand Transport Agency to deliver the project as one project. So that was what Council was signed into. So prior to now, Council has agreed to purchase property. We've been through all the Resource Management Act approvals, and there's a designation, and that sits within our district plan, so that the corridor is denoted in our district plan for roading purposes. We've had funding confirmed within the LTP, and we've also signed a multi-party funding agreement on it. The cross-section just north of the Cranford-Innes intersection and up to McFadden's has previously been approved by Council as well. This report, though, is not the final approval. It is the penultimate approval, hopefully, that is required by the organisation, because we still need to do the detailed traffic resolutions. So that is still to come. So there have been a number of approvals to date, but there's still a further one to come. The other point I think I'd make is that this project is different, but also related to the downstream effects project, which we've recently done some consultation on. So essentially, as part of the RMA approvals, there were specific conditions of the designation which required the preparation of a downstream effects management plan, and that's something that we've recently engaged with the public on, and we will take that information and give it to the independent expert who we have engaged to help prepare that particular document. So two different projects, but again, interrelated. In terms of today, we're asking the Council to approve or reject parking on the section of Cranford Street north of McFadden's Road, approve the relocation of the bus stops, approval for the intersection layout for the Cranford-Innes intersection, and these recommendations are part of the overall scheme approval for what was previously known as the Northern Arterial Extension. So that's the part of our part of this project, so south of QE2 Drive and up to Cranford Street and the Cranford Street upgrade. But as I mentioned previously, we'll have to come back to Council for the detailed resolutions if this is approved today. Referring you to the report that's in front of you, we have the Community Board recommendations to Council. And in terms of the section of Cranford Street north of McFadden's Road, at page 6 of my agenda, it shows the general layout of that cross section. So that shows the 1.4 metre wide grass berm on the eastern side, the 2.5 metre wide shared path, the shared path on the western side, the parking lane, the clearance strip, etc. So that is the broad overview of that cross-section of what we're recommending to Council for that portion of Cranford Street, which is north of McFadden's Road. It also seeks confirmation of the design for the Cranford Innes intersection, the relocation of the bus stops, and as part of the report from the Community Board, one of the additional resolutions that was put in was bringing forward funding for the completion of the link of the Papanui parallel to the Christchurch Northern Corridor. So essentially the Christchurch Northern Corridor has a shared user path down the length of it, and certainly on the Cranford Street side, it is on the western side of that, and just north of the commercial area on Cranford Street, the idea is to connect up that shared user path on the western side of Cranford Street with the Papanui parallel. Now currently within our LTP, that sits within years 22, 23, I think, and this resolution seeks to bring that forward, so by the time the Christchurch Northern Corridor is open, there will be a connection between the shared user path that forms part of the Christchurch Northern Corridor and the Papanui parallel. Obviously the Papanui parallel is one of our major cycle routes, and that provides a high level of service for cyclists. So that's the overview, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So do we have questions? Pauline, Aaron, Jan. Oh look, I'm just going to whip around the table, I think. So, Pauline?
Well, just a question. Can you clarify the speed limit for this stretch of road, Richard?
It's 50.
50k. Thank you. I've got a clarification in the resolution as well, because when you request the detailed traffic resolutions brought to the Community Board for final approval, does the Community Board have delegation for the final approval? I didn't think they did. Because I think the
Community Board for for yellow lines, etc., and for parking issues, it sits with the Community Board.
M and N, definitely the Community Board, so that they should be separate because they sit with the Community Board, but I think most of the others.
Confirms the scheme design for
Is everything in there delegated to the boards?
if it's not delegated to the boards, we'll ask that the board recommend it to the full organisation.
Yeah, all right, that's fine. And I just wanted to note too that in where did we put it? In C, 2C, that was a result of the Community Board discussion where there was identified a pinch point on the west side of the shared path, and that was due to the fact that there's a power box, I think, there.
That's correct.
So we've asked the staff to look at addressing that so there's no pinch point, and they'll have to come back with a detailed design of how that is removed.
That's correct, and we come back to the Community Board Council as part of that detailed design process.
Yeah. And the other thing is that point 6, as far as I'm aware, we already brought that into our LTP as part of our resolutions, I believe, at Council.
That's correct.
It'll already be there. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now look, I've got, I had Mike, Aaron, Yanni, Glenn. Was there anyone else? Sarah? All right, Mike.
In relation to the first resolution, is it standard process that a scheme design is approved on the basis of just a plan with no written detail?
In terms of the scheme design, so what normally it would be a plan, yes, that's approved by the organisation. The report itself might provide some description of what the road is, but I don't think that's a requirement.
Okay. So in this scheme design that we're looking at now, it's also got a cycleway that's leads to the east side of Cranford Street, when we know that's not actually the case.
That's correct.
So today we're asked to approve a scheme design that is not correct.
So, yes, we responded to that question, that the scheme design as part of the attachment does erroneously show a cycleway on the eastern side, but we'd anticipated clearing that up as part of the detailed design process. So when we come back for the final traffic resolutions, we'd provide an updated plan. So the process we're in at the moment is that the Alliance, who are delivering this project, are still finalising the detailed design, and once that's done, we will come back to council for the final and detailed traffic resolutions, and we would pick up on that issue of the cycleway on the eastern side of the intersection there where the Northern Arterial extension hits Cranford Street.
Okay. So looking at the whole project for the council part of it, and obviously the Northern Arterial extension, there's quite a bit of work already been done on it.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it now coming to council to approve the scheme design when it's so far along in construction?
So these projects like this go through a pretty detailed process, and when they go through the RMA process, the final design is never sorted out completely. So it provides an indication of what the project will look like at that stage. And then there's a very iterative process where you go through the specimen design to the detailed design. So we're now at that stage where the Alliance is up and running, and they are delivering the project, and it is normal for us to come back to council once the detailed design is complete or almost complete and seek final approval of the detailed traffic resolution. So that's a situation we're in now, and it's not dissimilar to what we've done on other projects across the organisation.
A little bit on the road, and in terms of, so this section of Cranford Street will be a mixed road, so it will allow for cyclists to be on the road with cars.
South of McFadden's, or?
Well, north of McFadden's. Between the extension and McFadden's Road, the cyclists will be a mixed road with cars and bikes.
Yes. So there's a wide shared user path for pedestrians and cyclists on the western side of Cranford Street, but there will still be the ability for cyclists to use the road.
So in the NZTA guidelines, it says that the minimum width for a mixed road with car parking is 4.3 metres, and that should be with a low speed environment. Obviously we are doing 4.2. I'm just wondering why we're dropping below that, or is this not a guide you go by?
I might defer that one to...
Okay. So cyclists aren't encouraged to use Cranford Street, and that's the purpose of putting that shared path on that western side. So they are trying to get the cyclists onto that shared path as a safe facility to cycle on. I mean, eventually Cranford Street will become busy, you know, and there could be up to 46,000 vehicles a day, so it's not an ideal environment for the cyclists. So that's why it's not really encouraged that they are on road. And if there was the on-road green paint, etc., it's going to keep them on road, because the desire is to try and get them onto that shared path and ultimately to pull them across the Pappenry parallel if possible.
So we can go below that 4.3 metre minimum, absolute minimum requirement by NZTA?
It's a guideline, and it's a guideline of best practice, and that's where, you know, that's where the judgment has to come into play, and is that adequate or not. In this particular situation, it's actually, that 4.2 metres is actually a 3.2 metre painted lane, so you have got that edge line that's going to be painted, whereas otherwise quite often it's just a wide curbside lane. So that the lane's actually been defined by that edge line, which creates that 1 metre buffer to the parking spaces. And those parking spaces themselves are 2.1, which is a comfortable width for a parking space.
So can I get some clarification? So you say it's just a guideline, yet in their document it says this width is an absolute minimum and should be used in a low speed environment, which we know it's not going to be a low speed environment. We know there's going to be 45,000 cars a day using Cranford Street. I'm just concerned because, yes, we're putting in a shared path, and we've got the major cycleway route a block away, and so therefore a lot of cyclists will use that. But if you're quite a confident cyclist and you're going up Cranford Street, so you're choosing not to use the major cycleway, you're most likely going to stay on the road. And it concerns me, I guess, that we're putting in we're going to install a road markings that are actually, or widths that are really below what we're sort of been told to do.
I mean, if we're arguing the matter of 100 millimetres, what you could do is take that parking space down to 2 metres and give another 100 mils to the to that 4.2 metre width. So I mean, we're probably arguing a little bit over the paint line, the position of that paint line. So it could be accommodated. As I said, that 2.1 is quite a generous width, and studies have shown that 1.9 to 2 metres can be adequate width for parking. So potentially, yep, that 100 mil shift could occur in that parking bay.
One last question. Can I confirm that cyclists coming from Redwood will be able to get on to the cycleway before Kiwi2 Drive?
Can I check the plans and come back to you on that one, please, Mike?
Well, the cycleway runs along the Northern Arterial. I just want to make sure that Redwood can actually access. Well, I would assume, but I just want to...
We could just check that and I'm happy to take other questions.
I think we should be right. We should
Right.
There's the underpass
At Winters Road.
at Winters Road, and there should be a connection through there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just reminding people that this has been through the community board. So, Aaron?
Yeah, so just got the cross-section drawing from McFadden's up to the interchange, but there isn't a cross-section drawing from McFadden's to Innes. Why is that?
So that's already been approved by council.
Right, okay.
And that the medium for that cross-section was set quite specifically in the decisions by the hearings commissioners. So that once that was set with the woods there was a limited ability to change that.
Right, and the 3.1 and 2.5 metre shared pathways are great up there, but then when you get down towards that intersection again, why is there not shared pathways? Was there not the ability to carry them through down at the lights?
So north of McFadden's, the road is significantly wider. It's about 31 metres, I think, and south of McFadden's, it's about 10 metres less. So it is a constrained environment south of McFadden's, and that's the cross-section that was approved by council a couple of years ago.
Right, so that when you look at that, I'm on page 4 of yours, 21 of ours, and you've come from Innes, and I'm looking mainly at the left-hand side at the moment, but you've got the footpath, and then there's that white line and the yellow lines and that for no parking. If there'd been a shared pathway out to, say, that white line, would that have worked or just can't?
Sorry, councillor, could you just, I'm not sure which area you're
Cranford
referring
Street,
to.
Just north of...
Just
Innes.
north of McFadden's?
Of Innes.
Oh, north of Innes. So the widths for the Cranford Street cross section are essentially a footpath of 1.7, 1.2 cycle lane and 3.10 traffic lanes with a reasonably generous median.
So we couldn't combine the footpath and cycle lane at that point?
The decision back in 2016 was to have a separate footpath and on-road cycle lanes.
Right, well, that's what it is. And then finally, the other one is your page 2, our 19. just the design up where you got the two roundabouts on Kiwi 2 Drive. So are we paying for everything from Kiwi 2 Drive?
No, so the New Zealand Transport Agency managed that part of the project just south of the intersections, and we pick up that area too, just south of the Cranford-Innes intersection. But I think the key thing to remember with south of the Cranford-Innes intersection is that we also have the downstream effects project. Yeah. So any designs we put in soon may be temporary in nature. So,
and my question there was, it's their money to waste, but was the kind of the over-specking around Winters Road, that you've got a whole lane coming off the roundabout there and going onto the motorway from Winters Road, whereas Winters Road had been cut off for the last 15, 20 years. You could come off further up, which you still can, and come in from the other end, which you still can, which actually created like a nice wee pocket environment. And now you've got, it seems like they're spending millions of dollars to make the neighbourhood less desirable.
So Winters Road has got the currently in construction of the subway at the moment, so that'll be a pedestrian link. So traffic coming out of Winters Road will simply connect up with Cranford Street. But it's
so you won't be able to drive up Winters anymore? I thought that was looked like. Oh, so that's under the motorway there. Is that a pedestrian subway only?
Pedestrian and cyclist.
Oh wow, it's big enough for a car. But
so, yeah,
maybe a Bambino.
Okay, that makes sense now. Sorry.
Yanni?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to check on page 21. There's a bus stop that's in the entire lane of traffic. And I just wondered if we'd had any safety audits around that placement. It's just outside 258 Cranford Street. I just recall that we tried a similar scheme in Hills Road, the bus border thing, where the bus stopped in the lane of traffic. It was a bit of a disaster, I think, from memory, and I'm just concerned about heavy vehicles, particularly with 45,000 cars going through here.
So the bus stops are in-lane bus stops, and the advantage of these sorts of bus stops is it basically gives priority to the buses, meaning the buses can immediately resume travel after a quick stop and then be away again after picking up and dropping off passengers. But we have placed them with care, so certainly when you see the locations there, some thought has gone into it. It does provide a slightly higher level of service than the recommended guidelines, which is a bus stop every 400 odd metres. I think these ones are spaced out at every 300 odd metres.
So have we considered putting a bus priority lane down here? It seems an ideal opportunity just to put one lane for high occupancy vehicles and buses.
So one of the benefits of this project will be to take traffic from both Marshlands and Main North Road. And Main North Road is identified as a key PT route in from the north, because that would also pick up on the key activity centres. However, with the draft Regional Public Transport Plan, it is proposed that I think one of the revised routes for the Orbiter would be up a portion of Cranford Street. So you would get, and the Orbiter runs every 15 minutes, so you would get a reasonable amount of buses there. In terms of a HOV or high occupancy vehicle lane, you'd be aware that the third southbound lane on the Waimat Bridge is proposed to go in with travel demand management measures, such as high occupancy vehicles. And I think one of the considerations of this organisation will be, well, what happens downstream of that.
So just trying to understand specifically for the scheme design that you've come up with here, what we're doing to reduce people getting into cars rather than just increasing the capacity for more cars, which it appears to be doing. So given that we've got the third lane on the bridge being an HOV bus priority type lane, I mean, I can't understand why we wouldn't have just extended that all the way through here to reduce the encouragement of people using single vehicles, single occupancy vehicles.
So I think you're right. Firstly, I'd say we need to look at this in the round, and as I mentioned, part of the benefit of the project is to reduce the amount of vehicles using Main North Road, so that key PT route becomes freer for buses. So that is one of the benefits of this, and that is your key bus route into town. However, in terms of the HOV, you're right that there may be a need for us to consider TDM measures as part of our network, and that's something when NZTA finalise their design for what happens on the third southbound lane that we as an organisation would need to consider.
Just, I think obviously we won't get it today, but it's really hard to see in terms of off-road cycleways, on-road cycleways, where the kind of cycle routes go through this area, how people access them, etc., which I just think would be really useful for us to actually get a kind of map showing the different cycling facilities in this area going to the north, and how they kind of interact.
We can certainly provide you with some information on that, but as I mentioned previously, there is a shared user path along the width of the corridor, and the hope is that that will connect in with the Papanui parallel, just north of the commercial area, north of McFadden Street. So there's just a small connection that needs to be made.
So does that shared path go all the way up to that new sort of commercial development?
So the idea is with the third southbound lane on the Waimak Bridge, that would also include a cycle lane on that as well.
Oh, sorry, just where Winters Road comes into Cranford Street, is the shared lane continued all the way?
So the shared user path would be along the length of the corridor. So, and part of that path would be through that, you'd have connection through Winters Path, and that's the subway in there. So it's a high level of service for pedestrians and cyclists along this project.
It's just kind of hard because it's kind of missing from the map, but basically on the, not the motorway side, on the other side of Cranford Street going north, that's going to have a shared pathway. Is that the western side? It's going to have a shared pathway all the way up to Main North Road.
So the shared user path will come along the western side of the northern arterial extension that will cross Cranford Street and then go along the western side of Cranford Street, where our anticipation is that it will, just before the commercial area, so where Placemakers is, it will then deviate to connect up with the Papanui parallel.
Sorry, you're talking about the city side. I'm talking about the Northlands Mall side of Cranford Street. So if you're going up to Main North Road along Cranford Street and you don't want to go, and it may be the question that might ask about getting access to Redwood, I'm not sure, but if you wanted to go up to like Northlands Mall, for example, along Cranford Street, and you're cycling, once you go past that northern roundabout.
So if you were going to Northlands Mall, why would you do that? Why on earth would you stay on Cranford Street?
Because you missed the turn.
Well, why would you go on the northern arterial to go to Redwood?
You take the Papanui parallel to get to Northlands.
Yeah.
Takes you straight there.
Well, no, we know cyclists will take the most direct route, and if this is a direct route and a shared pathway...
But it's not, it goes up and then down. You'd have to literally go up and then down. It doesn't make sense to go that way.
Yeah, okay. So maybe we can get the information back. I just think that would be really helpful. And the final question was, the Christchurch Southern motorway roundabout designs have, I think we've got a list of the worst intersections. I think it's ranked in one of the top intersections for safety in our city now.
Which one?
The Christchurch South motorway at the Hallswell. The two roundabouts, we've had a lot of crashes and accidents.
I just seem to have gone off the page. Where is
so
that?
the design on page 19,
We're putting in new
roundabouts, and I just wanted to know what safety audit we've done of those roundabouts to ensure that we don't get a repeat of quite frankly, the ridiculous situation at the Southern Motorway, where a brand new highway is one of the worst intersections in the city.
So my understanding of those two is that they will be redone as part of the Christchurch Southern Motorway 2. So that those two intersections were put in as part of the CSM original package of works. The CSM 2 is the connection out to Ralston, and with the increased traffic flows, they will reconsider those intersections.
No, sorry, the question is really around the safety audit of the proposed roundabouts in this plan, to just to ensure that we don't have to redo them when we get 60,000 or 100,000 cars coming through with the proposed development in Waimak.
So certainly all these proposals go through an extensive safety audit regime, and and certainly we'll do another one at the post-construction safety audit, but you do one before the final design is done, and you do one at scheme design. So they all have to go through gateways, and part of that gateway is a safety audit process.
Right, and the final thing, so if we didn't want to widen this to be like Brougham Street, and we just wanted, like, say, for example, 2 lanes going in the direction during the peak, so, 2 lanes going north after work and 2 lanes coming south before work, and just leaving 1 lane, is that an option that we've considered? Why has it been ruled out, or are we able to make that decision today?
Are you talking about south of the Cranford intersection, or are you talking as part of the Christchurch Northern Corridor?
Well, it's basically once the motorway comes in, the proposal that we seem to have in front of us is to basically turn Cranford Street into another Brougham Street. And for those of us who have got concerns around what that will do, I would have thought a sensible option would have been just looking at putting adequate provision for the cycling and the parking by not having 4 lanes, only having 3, and using the traffic demand as the way in which those get addressed.
So I think it's quite different to Bryan Street in terms of the adjacent land uses. So quite a bit of this is through Greenfields area, and only a small portion goes through what is ostensibly residential with a small amount of commercial. But this whole process has been through a very extensive scheme design, detailed design process, and a number of options were considered. What we've put in front of you today is pretty similar to what went to the hearings commissioners. So they've approved this, and that's the 2 lanes southbound, the 2 lanes northbound. And that, in terms of the traffic flows, which are already considerable and are predicted to get bigger, that's certainly our view of what you need, is 2 lanes in either direction.
Right, Glenn and then Sarah.
Thank you. My question is over a part of the Becker report page. It's page 4 for you, but it's page 75 for us, where it talks about buffer zones, and there's a recommendation up on the screen. It's item P, which talks about that and whether that adequately picks up the Becker recommendation, and it might be a view actually of the board members. So it talks about the buffer zone, it's important to minimise dooring. I'll ask Dave
to speak to
two reports all synced.
With the buffer zone, are we talking about on the shared path side or the road side?
On the eastern side.
That's the shared.
No, the shared path's on the western side.
Okay, it's the one that talks about the eastern side. Huh?
1.5.1 is it?
Yeah, it's
so there's a narrower shared path on the eastern side, and there's a wider shared path on the western side.
Yep.
And the idea is to have these, and this was one of the resolutions brought in by the community board. It's a good idea. It's similar to what we've done in other parts of the city. Has really put in this painted buffer, so just people are aware of that the proximity of what they're doing to cyclists, pedestrians. So it's not uncommon, and it's just correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, an additional safety measure.
Oh, I see. Yep. No, item P, isn't it? Yeah. It's just trying to keep that live traffic away from those parked cars on the road.
Yeah, and just if I can ask you a question too, in the paragraph below, you say because there's likely to be a low demand, it may not be required. Is that more a commentary on the cost-benefit ratio? Because if I'm out there myself, whether I'm with 100 cyclists or on my own, I still have the same percentage of being doored.
Yeah.
So is that what you're coming at?
Yeah. So what is recommended is that the actual parking along that roadside is actually not time restricted. So we're expecting a lot of those businesses will go and park there on the road. So it's only going to get used probably in the morning peak and evening peak of cars arriving to work and going home. So that's also minimising the amount that the cars are going to get, you know, opened up and cars entry, exiting in that. So that's just another kind of mitigation of trying to keep that risk to a minimum.
But in terms of the cyclists on the western side, the idea is that they would come off the shared user path and connect up with the Papanui parallel, which is obviously a very high level of service, but we recognise that some cyclists may not, so they can travel along the shared user path. There is a signalised crossing point just north of McFadden's, and they would have to cross at that part to get onto the eastern side of Cranford, and then there is a painted cycle lane, not a separated one, a painted cycle lane along that portion of Cranford Street, and confident cyclists can take that. So, but it is, it's not a wide cycle lane, and we would be encouraging people to use the Papanui parallel because that offers a high level of service.
Obviously, they'll be going against the flow of traffic, so in terms of visibility both ways, it's probably
So yes, and on the eastern side, the shared user path is minimum width, but it only services. There's currently 19 properties on that side, so it's a minimum number of people are actually going to use that. There is a potential subdivision just a little bit to the north, but again, that's not a significant number of additional residential properties that will come into play if that gets approved. So on the eastern side, we're anticipating pretty low demand of cyclists and of pedestrians as well.
Yep, Sarah?
Thank you. Actually, I'll follow on from that, but then before I ask the other ones. Are cyclists actually going to be legally banned from cycling on the Northern Arterial extension? Or are they just discouraged to use it? So I know that cyclists are actually allowed to bike on all state highways and things. Good question.
Which part of it?
No, the extension.
The extension,
where
so
the
south
Cranford
of QE2 Drive.
Yeah, where it leads into.
No, there's cycle lane on there.
No, I'm not saying... I'm saying, are they legally allowed to bike? Because it's a very direct route to get to some places, and that's why cars are going to want to use it. And cyclists bike along state highways.
They can.
Are cyclists banned from here?
It's not a state highway there, is it?
No, it's not a
just
state
a normal
highway.
road.
So it's not. My understanding is it's not proposed to ban cyclists from it.
So while you're saying that there's
encouraged.
very few properties, and maybe 19 currently residential properties with a potential extra small subdivision to the north of them, the potential on the eastern side, there is actually the potential for cyclists to be biking down the extension and through. I mean, they're not likely to be your interested but concerned, clearly, but confident cyclists getting from the north into town can legally choose to come down there, and then they get into a space where they have a minimum width shared path adjacent to residential driveways, and they could be coming in either direction because it'll be bi-directional as a shared path, and that doesn't seem to be a safe way of getting cyclists to wherever they want to go. Is there the potential to have maybe no 1 metre berm at all, like we're doing safety first, and distribute that extra metre in the road corridor to be able to put proper cycle lanes painted on the road?
Cyclists may choose to stay out, not use the shared user path on the eastern side and stay on the road.
Yeah.
So there is always that opportunity. I think when you start to push and pull with the berm and the 1 metre buffer, you can do those sorts of things, but I think there's also always consequential effects of doing that, and it's our view and certainly Dave's view as a qualified safety engineer that this is the best layout there, and the buffer is useful. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it does provide that kind of distance between parked cars and the traffic using that part of Cranford Street. But Dave, do you want to speak further on that?
Yeah, I mean, the 1 metre kind of buffer that we have got, I mean, it is minimal for a cyclist. I mean, a cyclist kind of envelope is about 1 metre. So you will be very close to that slow lane, effectively, and that's where I'd expect a lot of the trucks and things will be travelling along. So it's not going to be a very nice environment for a cyclist. And that's where, I mean, ideally they would be swapping over to that western side, or they may use that shared path on that eastern side. The risk of widening that shared path closer to those properties, again, you start affecting sight lines of those residents coming out their driveways as well. So we don't want to kind of encourage the cyclists to go too close to the boundary, because there's a lot of fences and vegetation down there as well. So it is a bit of a balancing act.
But if we didn't have a shared path, we could have a 1.8 metre wide pedestrian path, leaving an extra 0.8 plus the 1 metre berm potentially. So you could have an extra 1.8, which is a standard width cycle lane that could be painted on either side of the road. And if it's safety first, like the new GPS, it would seem to me that actually providing a safe space for cyclists would be much better than having them on that small shared path. Anyway, so I mean, I would prefer that we were doing that. Can I go back to the RMA process? So this has been through the scheme design for the extension that we're being asked to approve today. Has been through the RMA process. Is that right?
That's correct. So it went through the RMA process. It was heard by 3 independent commissioners.
Yep.
There were 2 appeals to the Environment Court, and those were agreed by consent. So the Environment Court sealed and issued the consent order early February, I think, 2016.
Okay, so with other projects that we've got currently, such as cycleways, the scheme design comes to council, or the ITE committee in that case, for sign-off before it goes to an RMA process. And I'm thinking about sort of the Humphreys Drive section there. So actually council's been through that process. And it seems to me that this seems to be the wrong way round. So council wouldn't have much of an option now that it's been to court, for example. Why didn't we get this earlier?
So council always has the opportunity, and perhaps I'm straying into legal realm here, but the opportunity to make its own independent decisions under the Local Government Act. So council may choose to do something which differs from the RMA, but you've always got that risk that if you do that, then there might be consequences of that, of being inconsistent with the RMA decision, and us having to seek changes to either the designation conditions or something else. So,
but that speaks to why we should have made a decision on the scheme design before it went through the RMA process, doesn't it? Because that's what we're doing with our other projects.
Well, I don't know if that's certainly happening with all of them, and as I mentioned in my preamble at the beginning, this has been through a number of council processes, including property purchase. We've signed agreements. It's been through the RMA process. We've agreed on a cross-section of it. So it has been through we've put funding in our LTP. There's been numerous briefings to committees, etc. So it has been through a number of approvals, but we're now at the detailed design phase, and once the detailed design gets shaped up, that's when we normally bring these projects back to council and say, well, look, we had a scheme design, and that's what we thought it looked like. We've been now a lot further along in terms of the process, and now this is what we know it's going to look like, bar a few amendments, and that's when we bring it to the organisation for approval. So to bring it earlier on, to me, would have been problematic, because there would have been a number of changes that would have been subject to.
And just lastly, we saw during the long-term plan process that we have another major road without a cycle lane, so Memorial Avenue, where people, I guess in the past, have been encouraged to use other ways to get into town. But we saw quite a strong number of submissions on people wanting cycle lanes on that space, and it seems like it's a very similar space to Cranford Street here. And councillors were, I think many of them, sort of swayed by the need for a cycle lane down there. It seemed to me that if we're putting in a similar type of road, we might look to do that proactively beforehand, rather than wait till the demand is there later down the track and then try to retrofit. is there a chance for this to go back now to actually have that re-looked at actually putting proper cycle lanes on the road?
For Cranford Street?
For this section.
As you're aware, the project has been delivered. South of McFadden's Road, we are constrained by space. The corridor is only 21 metres wide. If the cycle lanes in that section were proposed to be widened, something else would need to give, whether it be the median, whether it be the footpath, or we'd need to get into property purchase. So, to my thinking, the time for that has passed, and if you did get into that now, that would have implications on the delivery of the project and costs for council.
So that's why it should have come earlier, potentially.
But the section south of McFadden's did come to council, and it has been approved.
Sorry, just a follow-up on that. I just want to get some clarification. Is it possible, as it stands right now, to be able to remove a section of, or reduce the boom on the east side, change that shared path on the east side to a footpath, reduce the car parks to 2 metres and actually create cycle lanes and still fit everything else in?
Yeah, there's room, but there is room for that, but the problem is we'd have to have a look at the utilities, and Orion have got some extensive infrastructure along there, and that may have to be shifted, and if that has to be shifted, it's quite costly. So this here fits in the scheme that we've got here, but if we had to widen it, there might be an issue with the curbs, and they could interfere with the infrastructure.
But so it's possible though, and we could look into it, and if it is actually doable, we could actually go down that road and actually create a slightly safer environment?
Yeah, my only concern would be that you'd be promoting that cycle lane hard up against that parking zone as well, so that probably increases that risk of dooring by encouraging cyclists to use the road. So that's the benefit of trying to get them off the road, is to minimise that dooring, and you know, and that dooring is going to occur on a very, very busy road as well. So if you want to try and avoid that door, you're going to probably end up being in the live traffic lane as well. So yeah, I guess totally accept where you're coming from, and that will give you an extra 800 millimetres to 900 millimetres to allocate to that clearance strip, so you could be up to 1.5 metres for a cyclist, which is good. But the concern there then is, what's the risk of that dooring happening on a very, very busy road? Okay. So that's probably the trade-off.
So, all right, so that seems to be everyone's questions dealt with. I'm always nervous with these ones, obviously because of previous history with the Northern Corridor. You know, the councillors, you know, I would say by majority, are not incredibly happy with the RONS projects of the previous government and the imposition that this project has on our budget. But we have signed up for it, and that was a long time ago, and we're committed to it. You know, I understand that you know, that people will want to debate this and to vote on it. I suppose the thing that makes me just a little bit nervous about the whole thing is that where we end up. So I will move the motion as it is and ask for a seconder for it, Aaron, and I'll open it up for debate. Yanni.
Thank you. Consistent with how I've previously voted on this project, I won't be supporting this today. I think we're really losing the opportunity to think about the future by having a much smarter way of encouraging people to move through our city. And I think the sad reality for this project is this is all about enabling more development in Waimakariri. This is all about creating greater urban sprawl on some of our most versatile soils in the city. This is about the most unsustainable approach that we could have to development that is being applied here. And it's no criticism of the staff, because I do appreciate that there's agreements that have been signed and staff have been tasked to do that work. But you know, it's just such a lost opportunity. When we think about putting a third lane on the bridge, and not to have this as an HOV lane, but just to have it for all traffic to use, I think is just really disappointing. Having bus stops in the middle of high volume traffic lanes, I think creates all sorts of safety problems in terms of visibility of people crossing roads, cars stopping, cars swerving out. So I look at what's happened in Brougham Street, and if you widen this road, all you're going to see is more and more traffic. It's not a sustainable approach. The whole idea of not using people coming down Martians Road, which has got a lot less communities along it than this one, I thought was really sensible. Instead, what we're doing is trying to transfer that traffic onto this part of the network, and the downstream effects are going to be massive. So I won't support this today. I think the real tragedy is also the fact that we don't seem to have a very good system of off-road separated cycleways connecting our city. And the point that Councillor Scandrett has made, which I totally endorse, is we need to start thinking about not just getting from a cycleway in the middle of town to the furthest reach of a suburb, but actually how people within the area access the cycleways to go to things like schools or places of employment. And I just can't see that in this design. So I won't be supporting this today. I just would say that this is a really poor outcome for what we know is going to happen in the future, which is that change is going to happen very quickly, and we're much better spending less money on more flexible and dynamic solutions rather than huge amounts of money on fixed and hardwired infrastructure.
Pauline?
Yep, thank you. And look, I agree with what Yanni's saying, but I think we've got to be a bit pragmatic today. The Mayor talked about the imposition on our budget. I'm one of the councillors who has never approved of the RON scheme, and I think it's a shame that it's got as far as it's got, but it has. But it's also an imposition on our community, particularly St Albans. They're feeling it really hard. So for us to do nothing today, for us to do none of these, lines and parking adjustments and bus stop movements, would have been a worse imposition. I think this is only going to help the traffic to flow. There's been really good compromise through the consenting process with the businesses and residences around the north of McFadden's Road there. Compromise that perhaps pro-cyclists and pedestrians would probably not agree with, but where some parking has been retained but some removed. And I think it's all about finding that balance and remembering that cyclists in that area do have options. I think it's really important to remember that, so they don't have to ride down there. But we have made it as safe as possible for them to do so. So we're trying to accommodate safety and traffic flow in an area without property purchases and road widening, basically. It's really challenging, and we all know the constraints of this scheme. As I said, I've never supported the Northern Arterial. The community I know is really supportive of investigating a park and ride, perhaps around QE2 Drive there, where people will only take the motorway to there and either jump on an express bus or a cycle and get into town that way. So those options are still on the table. I think they're worth investigating. But for today, I'm going to have to support this, because I think if we don't support it, it's going to be actually worse for the community. It's going to create worse congestion, more frustration, and I think we just need to go with this part for today.
Jamie?
Look, I'll keep this relatively brief, but I think it's just important to stress that the city doesn't end at kids' cakes. You know, this is about a growing city and a connected city. It's about adequate infrastructure, and I think not making calls like this today would be akin to the Auckland Council in the 1980s, where they look back and they rue the day that they didn't adequately plan for the future. So I will be supporting this today, and I think future generations will thank us for it, and I think it's most certainly well overdue.
Okay, Mike?
Thank you. I actually think we potentially are making the same mistakes Auckland did by not actually investing in real sustainable transport network. This is just another car project that's just going to create actually more congestion at the end of the day and actually encourage people to move out of Christchurch. Firstly, I'll probably vote separately on a couple of the issues. The first part of the issue around the Northern Arterial Extension, I can't support it, partly based on principle. Last year, as the chair of the local community board, I did not support the project, and now as City Council, I still do not support this project. A 12-kilometre, $300 million plus motorway designed to get cars into and out of Christchurch easily. It's just not where we should be heading. You know, a motorway that's going to put 45,000 vehicles onto Cranford Street daily, increasing emissions and literally splitting a community in half. You know, we missed a real opportunity to create a people-focused, sustainable transport network for the north of Christchurch when this project was agreed to. But we still need to keep an open mind on one of those lanes becoming HOV and PT in the future. It is so important for the communities that are actually going to be affected by this project. I also do have issues with the scheme design. To me, we're agreeing to a design purely based on a plan that is clearly wrong. It's got cycleways that aren't going to exist. That's another reason why I can't support number one. The second part of the resolution, I cannot support. I believe there are safety concerns in there that give me real concern. You know, although the recent release of the government policy statement on land transport has safety and access as one of the two strategic priorities, we're about to approve a plan that, in my opinion, will create one of the most unsafe major arterial roads in our city for our most vulnerable road users, and I don't think that's actually good enough. I would like to acknowledge the Community Board for a number of extra provisions they've added to the staff's recommendation to actually try and increase the safety. The Community Board's actually, you know, been very close to this project for a long time and are aware of the effects, and are trying to do the best they can out of a bad situation. I do support the upgrade of the intersection. I think, you know, as far as the community's concerned, it's one of the only benefits they're actually going to get from this project, and it's been wanted for a long time. I'd also like to voice my disappointment around the consultation on this item. For such a major project that only a very limited number of people were consulted with, and that the Community Board only found out about this consultation by accident on the very last day of it, is actually unbelievable, and it's actually also not acceptable, and I hope this never happens again. Basically, to wrap it up, I cannot support a project funded by rates that is going to adversely affect Christchurch community by this much, so the people on the other side of the river can get into Christchurch quicker.
Okay, Andrew.
Comments probably around process rather than the substance of what's here. I mean, I'm aware that the Community Board have obviously taken a very deep dive into this, and I know that it was well discussed at the Community Board meeting. But what I'm hearing is people proposing to vote against the proposal that's in front of us, which has come obviously by majority from the Community Board. I'm not hearing anybody proposing any amendments. I'm not hearing anybody foreshadowing any further motion. That means that if there were a majority of people who went with the sort of comments that have already been made in debate, and people voted against what we've got in front of us here, we would have a scheme that we were committed to that we had no design for. At the very least, from the report, that shows that we'd be up for considerable additional expense, and it may be that we will be left in a completely untenable position. So I'm a little bit confused how people can be proposing to vote against what we've got in front of us without proposing any alternative that allows this project to proceed. If what people are really saying is they don't want the project to proceed at all, then that is totally contrary to the position that we've taken in our long-term plan. So, you know, I mean, maybe I make the comment that it's very easy to vote against things when you're expecting to be in a minority, and therefore the outcome of the vote will be the recommendation, but a position can be taken of voting against. I think we need to be very careful that we don't end up with a majority of people voting against this and therefore no way forward. So really comments more around process and outcomes than the substance of what we've got in front of us.
Sarah?
I'd like to foreshadow option 2. And flip back to my notes. And my speech consists of Yanni and Mike have said all that needs to be said, and I'm not going to vote in favour of this work when it's not safe for all road users.
Okay. All right, so Aaron.
Yeah, sorry, I can't help myself on this one. The having lived in the area for quite a long time, it's not just about people north of the bridge. There's a lot of people at the north end of the city that will use this. It's the part of the access to the inner city. If you want to have a successful inner city, we need this. If Canterbury's to grow to a potential population or greater Christchurch of around 1 million people is foreseeable in our lifetime, we will need this. It was planned in the 1960s. And currently we've got 23,000 cars a day travelling an extra kilometre unnecessarily because the work wasn't done 20, 30 years ago. So if you want to reduce carbon, that's the way to do it. And you have to ask yourself, when you're an elected member on a council, is it your job to dictate to people the way they should live their lives or facilitate the way they want to live their lives? And unless we're going to bring in carless days or have border patrols and don't make them get out of their car and walk, they just won't. We can encourage cycling, and I'm fully supportive of that. We'll never have a public transport system with the density of population that we've got that'll work, but we can have a public transport system that can add to the package. But we have to facilitate vehicles and heavy vehicles and cars that are coming in and out of a successful city and do it as pragmatically as we can and stop getting in the way and encourage people to use the cycleway, which is 1 block away. And it's a multi-million-dollar huge asset to the city. It's a great asset, and even if we put up little signs to let them know how bad for their body carbon monoxide is. So biking on one of the busiest roads and sucking up as much carbon monoxide as you can isn't that smart. You might look cool in your Lycra, but move over 1 block, you'll live longer.
Right, okay. Yeah, I've already made the statements that that I wanted to make. So I'll put the motion. Sorry? So approves the scheme design. Sorry, why do you want them separately? One.
I'm happy to support 3 down.
1 and 2 together.
1 and 2 together.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant put 1 and 2 separately. I was having difficulty understanding why you would want to do that. So, so I'll put 1 and 2, but we might as well do a vote on it. So, have you got the thing set up?
We'll just do it manually.
Oh, do it manually. Okay, all right. So I'll just get that called. Yep.
Yep. Resolutions 1 and 2. Councillor Johansson? No. Councillor Swags?
Yes.
Councillor Templeton?
No.
Councillor Mangy?
Yes.
Councillor Kewen?
Yes.
Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
No.
Councillor Cotter? Yes. The Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Goff?
Yes.
Councillor Livingstone?
Yes.
Councillor East?
Yes.
Councillor Clearwater?
Yes.
It's 11-3.
Thank you. Great. Okay. So now we'll move on to the balance of the resolutions, 3 to 6. So I'll put those now. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. So the no is just you, Yanni, and Sarah. Sarah Templeton opposed as well. Thank you. So how are we going for time? 12:42. Sorry.
29:48.